In its style, the architecture still looks exactly like the 90s. Basically, it's like writing something on a wall, right? So if you wrote something on a wall, you would also not think that the wall suddenly awakens, right?
How do you check if the moral fact is right?
Yeah, so that's a crucial question, right? That's the epistemology for ethics. So how do we know? Well, I'm always supportive of a good technology, right? I mean, we came up also using, cutting-edge technology. What I am, though, against
はい、PIVOTの竹下です。今日はですね、哲学者のマルクス・ガブリエルさんにお越しいただいています。ガブリエルさんはですね、29歳で200年以上の伝統を持つボン大学の教授になった本当哲学界のロックスターと呼ばれている人で、この哲学の最前線の方が今の資本主義とかビジネスとか AI についてどう思っているかを聞いていきたいと思います。で、始めたいと思います。So, Professor Marcus Gabriel, welcome to PIVOT.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So it's been 4 years since you last came to Japan.
Yeah.
How's it so far?
Well, it still feels a little post-pandemic. So I visited many places, as many as I could during the pandemic, and then always when they just reopened. So I was like the first, I think, passenger who entered Canada after they opened. I went to New York 2 days before they reopened on a visa, among other things because I find it quite interesting to see, right, how these places felt, in the pandemic or right after, being vaccinated, etc., no more risks. So I just want to go. And so Tokyo still feels a little post-pandemic, right? You can still tell there was a pandemic, right? There's still this pandemic hangover.
Yes. It's interesting that you use the phrase, Tokyo looks like the 1990s. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, in general, right? So the 90s had this wonderful postmodern dream of a completion of modernity. Right? And that, of course, included a particular type of just very successful globalization with its architectures, its style, etc. And Japan always played a major role in the formation of that imagination of the future, with its soft power from Nintendo to Tokyo cityscapes. And Japan, unlike other cities like New York, for instance, right, in its style, the architecture, again, the entire imagination that's realized here in the movement, in the shape, it still looks exactly like the 90s, but in a contemporary fashion. It doesn't look like a thing from the past. It's like traveling to a future of the 90s.
So it's different from New York or other cities in Europe?
Completely different. New York has adapted entirely to the 21st century. It has a new skyline. It begins to look much more like Singapore. It's not at all Woody Allen's New York, say, right? So New York has lost the entire postmodern feel, right? It has entered a new phase. I'm not even saying in any way a better one, but you see it has changed. Similarly for London, where some of the significant bits of the landscape also have changed due to new skyscrapers, etc. Right? And Tokyo, of course, continues, but it is very much like a really good version of the 90s. I feel, like I'm not saying it's stuck in the past, right? But despite the futuristic elements.
So it's in a positive way.
It's in a positive way in the 90s.
In the 90s,
in a positive way. The good things of the 90s were not given up here.
That's interesting. So you are the rock star of philosophy, and I have tons of questions I want to ask you, but let's start with a simple question. So what do you think about ChatGPT and all the AI phenomenon?
Well, I think there's spectacular techno-scientific progress, right? I mean, now large natural language processing models have become better now, right? And, arguably these systems now, pass the Turing test. That is, they strike us as intelligent, right? These are gigantic technological breakthroughs. But I do not think that any of this is as game-changing as we perceive it, right? So it's not that AI has now become a threat or is approaching human-level intelligence or has become really intelligent. It hasn't awakened in any interesting sense. It's just like really good new technology.
Are you against AI or are you supportive of ChatGPT and the new AI technology?
Well, I'm always supportive of a good technology, right? I mean, we came up also using, cutting-edge technology faster than ever with good new vaccines against a dangerous virus. So how would I be against this? And similarly for AI. What I am, though, against is the ideology and propaganda surrounding it. For instance, the very idea that we might be witnessing, something that's coming closer to us gradually, or even a Terminator-style scenario.
Yes, Nick Bostrom.
Any of the Nick Bostrom stuff, for instance, right? Or other post and transhumanist discussions about how this will profoundly change human nature. I don't think that anything that humans as animals, right, will do profoundly changes human nature.
Why do you think so? Because when I use ChatGPT, it seems very intelligent and very fast evolving. So I'm kind of scared that AI will someday kind of have a generative intelligence. What do you think? Why aren't you afraid of that?
Well, because I think that the system itself, right, if you, as it were, could really look at it, not from the user surface, right? So if you use this, there's this illusion, of the surface, because words seem to appear, you type in words, so you feel like you're in dialogue with something. But what actually happens in the system is just noise, as I say, right? Nobody's there. Basically, it's like writing something on a wall, right? So if you wrote something on a wall, you would also not think that the wall suddenly awakens, right? But what we're doing is kind of writing something on a wall. It's just that the material, right, the digital infrastructure, the electromagnetic stuff that's happening on the level of the transistor and all of that is just super fancy technology. But I think its ontology, its way of being, is exactly like that of a wall.
I see. So before going to the next topic, I want to ask about new realism and how it affects or affected by AI, because in your book you said that the world doesn't exist, but unicorns exist, or maybe Mount Fuji exists, or a Shizuoka version or Yamanashi version, or in our minds. So if AI will be evolving in the future, and they'll start generating a lot of content, and also maybe gain general intelligence, there will be some domains we will not even realize that we're creating the AI. So do you think that the improvement of AI will affect your theory of new realism?
Well, it does to a certain extent, but only in the following ways. So what I'm really thinking about, and I think that's something we should all be discussing, is, I still think that the relationship between AI and human intelligence is the relationship between target system and a model, right? So if, for instance, we are currently recorded, we are the target system.
Yes.
What people see now is a model of us. They don't see us. They see a technologically produced model of us, right? And the model differs from us. Right? We are human animals. The model is not a human animal. I have hairs. The model does not have hairs, right? It portrays my hairs, but it doesn't have them. So the question, though, is what is the model target system relationship in the case of AI? Because there are models which are similar, of course, to the target system in relevant ways. Simple example. If you build a little city, say a model of Tokyo, right, and you flood the model of Tokyo to see the effect of climate change, then you flooded something, right? So there you have a model target system relationship where the overlap is significant. And so I think what we need to be discussing is not whether AI is intelligent. No, it's not. But whether the way in which it models intelligence, right, interferes with our thought processes. So we need to discuss not AI as an independent autonomous agent, because it's not that. We need to discuss the way in which it's integrated into our thought processes. That should be the discussion, right?
Yes.
It's like the flooding of the model.
So it's the opposite, yeah.
It's the opposite of the debate that we should be having. We're having an important debate, but we're coming from the wrong direction.
Okay, great. So next I want to ask you about ethical capitalism, because ethics in Japanese, we call it rinri. It seems very authoritative. It's like a principle, your father coming to you and telling you what to do. So before we go into that discussion, I want to ask you about how do you define moral? And you say moral facts, because to me, facts is 2 + 2 is 4, and morals can't be facts. What do you mean by morals?
So I really think that just like 2 + 2 is 4 is a fact, or that we are in Tokyo is a fact, I think that I shouldn't torture you is also a fact, right? So I think it's on the same level.
Same level.
It's one of those facts, right? And I think that there are many moral facts we haven't yet detected. For instance, what's the best ethics for the use of artificial intelligence? Or what is the morally best solution to the pandemic? You see, we needed to protect us from the virus, but we must not close schools. So I think school closures in the pandemic were human rights violations. But then the question is, how do you reconcile that, right? So which level of social distancing is morally acceptable and what is torture, right? And so, but we didn't figure that out in any acceptable way. We just did stuff, more or less randomly, every country in different ways. So a moral fact then really exists, like 2 + 2 = 4. It's just that we don't know enough about them.
I see. Because, to me, facts seems like very concrete, 100% sure evidence. So, for instance, I have a baby here, and I threw him out the window. That's bad,
100% evidence, certainly a fact.
But if you say, if I'm a Taliban, and I say to you that we ban women from universities because that's ethical for us. How do you respond to that?
I would say it's exactly like the baby out of the window. I would say you are evil.
I see.
The Taliban are out of the question, just evil.
But they
have no right to do any of the things.
But they're saying that that's ethical for them.
They're wrong.
I see.
That's like, imagine you meet someone who thinks 2 + 2 is 7. Still wrong. And if they say, but in my culture, 2 + 2 = 7, the reply to this is, it's still wrong.
But that's the confusion we're having today, because Russians say they have their own ethics, Chinese say they have their own ethics. Do you think it's possible for us to have a universal ethics or a moral facts?
Yes, I think that's the only ethics. I think these arguments, Russians have their own ethics, are just justifications for doing evil. Just like the critique of Western colonialism.
So it's like a propaganda.
It's propaganda. It's pure propaganda. And as a matter of fact, for the Chinese case, you can even show that it's intentionally designed as propaganda.
So when we say about facts, say 2 + 2 is 4, or there's a scientific fact, we can have peer reviews or we can have experiments. But when we think about morals, it's very difficult to fact check. How do you check if the moral fact is right?
So that's a crucial question, right? That's the epistemology for ethics. So how do we know? Right? What heuristics do we deploy? And my idea is that the humanities are the experimental basis for ethics. So that's why a lot of moral progress in the contemporary world is coming from the humanities. Take gender theory, right? So there are lots of things we didn't know about gender until 50 years ago, right? And so humanity made lots of mistakes about gender. We had weird theories about birth and sexuality and self-determination and homosexuality, right? I mean, there's still enough people who think homosexuality is a crime or immoral, right? And then it turned out it's not even a moral issue, right? It's completely irrelevant. And now we learn, for instance, about the rights of trans people. There are lots of things we didn't know before, and now we just know them. How do we find them out? In this case, through the humanities, through activism. So I think that the combination, the typical academic contemporary combination of the humanities, social sciences plus activism is the experimental basis of ethics.
I think so. Do you think humanity changes, or we're just finding out that other parts of humanity?
I think we found that out.
Okay.
But here's one important part of the story. I think no moral fact is ever fully hidden. That's the difference to a physical fact.
That's interesting.
So the spin, it's not necessary that humans discovered spin. We found this out, a lot of mathematics, right? We could forever have not gotten it, right? But if something is evil, then someone will know, at least the victim, right? So the ancient Greeks, for instance, right, committed sexual harassment every day, all the time, right? It was a completely evil, like Taliban. For me, the ancient Greeks have the moral level of the Taliban, right? And slavery is awful, right? But they just never asked the women or the slaves.
I see.
So someone could have known, but they asked the wrong people. They asked the male philosophers of the time.
I see. So we don't need quantum computing or technology to find that out.
No. We just need more investment in the humanities.
Okay. So I sometimes read Peter Singer, and I eat meat. I love meat. But maybe in the future, eating meat is a very crucial thing, and maybe people say that animals should have rights. Is that humanity, or is that something we're not just aware of?
Yeah, so the question, the question of vegetarianism, veganism, etc., is is a very complicated one. I mean, the question is, which are the moral facts we're discussing here?
Right.
So if we should not hurt anything that can consciously, experience pain, I'm very happy to accept that, right? But then the classical counter-argument is something like this. Imagine that, out of the blue sky, all problems are gone. Nobody has cancer anymore. Everything's perfect. All the SDGs are met, and we wonder what happened. But then we just start enjoying it. Perfect life, right? But unbeknownst to us, there's an alien civilization which has come down on Earth. They make our life perfect, but they kill us and eat us. But nobody notices, right? Everybody thinks people just die happily. What really happens is they have this magical thing, and then you die and they eat you, right? Would you want to live in that world rather than the one we're in it? I have to say, I want to live in that world.
I see.
I see nothing that speaks against that world. It's my intuition. Now imagine that we can do that to cows. No problem with the burger then, right? So that would be the reply.
I see.
It's a thought experiment because we don't treat animals this way, right? So we have wonderful arguments against the way in which we produce meat right now, but as far as I can tell, they do not demonstrate that we should be vegetarians. And here's another problem. Do we know that cauliflower does not experience pain? There's evidence that plants cry, right? Yes. Certainly there's harm behavior, right? They retreat to roots, there's harm behavior. And so imagine that cauliflower suffers, right? Then what? You see, and that would take all of this quite seriously. So we don't know enough about the facts in order to know whether we should be vegetarians. So this is exactly why I think that we need to have serious ethical investigation.
I ask you this because, in Japan there's kind of animism, and for instance, we think about robots as similar to human beings. So if I have a robot dog here and I throw it out a window, it doesn't hurt, but maybe it hurts the Japanese feeling. So that's why I asked you this question. Yes.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would throw that robot out of the window, but I wouldn't do it because I don't want to hurt you. Right? But not the robot.
Not the robot.
I would throw if I were alone, nobody's watching, no Japanese is watching.
I see.
And I think it's different from doing that with the babies. Nobody's watching. I still wouldn't throw the baby out.
Okay. So let's say we have the moral facts and it's universal. So how can you build capitalism based on that moral fact?
Yeah. A very simple way of saying, how do we solve the problems of the capitalist system is to say, imagine everybody would be nice. Right?
Okay.
And then you see, problem solved. Nobody exploits anybody, yes. Right? And I'm following that idea. The very simple idea is, imagine everybody behaved correctly, right? Well, then, of course, capitalism wouldn't be a problem. Now, but I want to go farther than that. So imagine that we take the capitalist, economy and infuse it with moral products. Imagine everybody makes money by doing the right thing, just like in the pandemic, producing vaccines, right? Or Zoom. Zoom helped us survive. So Zoom and other companies made a lot of money by providing us with ethical tools. They allowed us to stay home and nevertheless keep the economy running. So for a while, video technology was an ethical tool, and therefore people made money. And so in my ethical capitalism, the products which win in the evolutionary race for survival of the company that are ethically adapted to the moral facts.
I see.
That's my interpretation of the invisible hand.
So why is that two parts, ethics and capitalism, not combined yet?
Yeah, because we have decoupled them, as I say, using an idea by the economist Dennis Noah. He speaks from decoupling and recoupling. That's his useful language.
Yes.
And so I think we have decoupled techno-scientific, economic and moral progress. And that happened around 1900 in the period, industrialization and its consequences. So the problem is not capitalism, but industrialization without ethics. That's the problem. That's where the mistake happened.
Could you give some example of a company or business that combines moral and capitalism?
Yeah, BioNTech, Pfizer, right? They did exactly that.
I see.
Right? They did the morally right thing, and they made a lot of money from this, which is then distributed in Germany, where BioNTech is located, through tech system, and they are improving the university system, where et cetera, right? But that would be a very obvious example.
And I heard in your state, you're kind of advising the state, you're doing some projects about ethical capitalism.
What we do there concretely is for the state, like we run an AI certificate project. So we get use cases from the real business, etc. world, and then the team looks at them, right, and writes reports about the ethical shortcomings, how to improve, etc. So that we can learn about how to produce an ethically grounded AI certificate, which you can then actually use as a market force, right? If you get gold, then people know, right? They look at, this is an AI thing. It's gold. Wow, let's get that one over the silver one.
And you talked about the Department of Ethics. Could you elaborate on that? What do you think every company should have that kind of department in-house?
Yes, I think so. Imagine a world in which every company, just like it has a tax department or an HR department and so forth, had an ethics department, which is just as important as the other ones. And it's an interdisciplinary team, and they are thinking about the moral facts with which the company is involved, both internal to the company, so they replace compliance, right? It's not a purely legal compliance team. They kind of fuse with the compliance team, but they want to improve the moral culture of the company, right? An ethical kaizen, as it were.
I see.
And similarly to any outside engagement of the company. And I argue that this would improve the company's economic performance. It wouldn't limit it. It would guarantee the company's future success.
Why is that?
Because if you get the moral facts right, you get the human interest right. Humans are interested in being respected. So if you know what it takes to respect the common humanity with your clients and your products and how you affect the environment, if you know those moral facts and you factor them into your product will be more interesting. It will just be a better product.
So that's the tricky part, because let's say there is a moral facts and we know that what's ethical, but we need some kind of power to implement into society. Maybe the Department of Ethics should be powerful, similar to CEO, or maybe the nation state should force someone. Or do you think we can leave it up to human beings and they'll start being good people?
Well, I think, imagine we had, we spread this ethics department model. Of course, then also politics should have one, etc., on the governmental level. But let's imagine that we start, do this business style first, right? So, and then imagine we travel back to the past.
Yes.
Imagine it's 30 years ago. The Limits to Growth report is just out. People become aware there's an ecological problem. And then they're sitting there, in a car company at the time, everything completely fossil, and they start thinking about, this thing, and they're like, e-mobility. Right? And then they start with and everybody thinks they're crazy. BMW now has this e-mobility department, and they work on batteries, etc. Right? Imagine where they would be now. They would be controlling the entire world's market because they saw it coming, right? And so similarly, imagine Shell would have had such an ethics department, right? They will go, Jesus, we can't do this oil thing anymore, and they would have looked at, what's the new oil, and then they could have anticipated something about data. Right? And so that's what my ethics department would do. It would guarantee the sustained success of the company. And in this particular way, by being successful in business, right, you motivate, actually you force your competitors to be as ethical as you.
So there needs to be no power.
No. No, exactly. It's not. The ethics shouldn't be tied to a power, because then again it would be an authority.
Yes,
right.
It would be like a Hobbes situation.
It would be a Hobbes situation with the benevolent dictator. I want no dictator, neither benevolent nor evil.
But what if someone violates the ethical statement and rules? Yeah.
So in the economic sphere, I think if the competitors are ethical companies, then the evil companies are just not successful. They die out.
They're out.
Yeah, evolution.
They'll be kicked out of the market.
Yeah, they are just kicked out of the market in just the usual market way. So they just die out.
Okay, so business I understand, but what's like civil lives? Who will taking charge of someone who violates ethics?
Yeah, then, like to a certain extent, that's already the law, right? And so we got to improve the law. And we do this gradually. For instance, we are now gradually becoming aware of the fact that psychological violence is just violence, right? So nobody slaps people in the face in the work life anymore. That gets you fired, right? And soon, I hope, that even like really aggressive workplace behavior, like a yelling boss should be fired. Right? Imagine it's completely clear that a yelling boss is like a slapping boss, right? We are not quite there yet. We think a yelling boss, he's just a little it's like, you leave that company, but you don't see this as. But we should get to a point where we realize that ethical behavior, right, should be rewarded, and then the law comes in. Then we need to improve the law.
I see.
Like we did for mobbing and things like that, right?
So let's talk about children. So do you think morals should be taught to children?
I think we should learn morals from children.
Okay, learn from children.
I think we should learn from children. For instance, there's enough evidence, both anecdotal and scientific, that children are not racists. Only at a certain point,
that's true, yes.
Racism is taught. For racism, we know it's learned, or it comes late, certainly, right?
I see.
So that's where we need to start. So we need to both teach them ethics, rational thinking about that, and then listen to what they have to say. Right?
I see.
Children's, we should stop, in general, we shouldn't think of children as recipients of our knowledge.
I see.
Right? As if hardware on which we have to implement our cultural software.
So we're not born evil, but we become evil.
Definitely. I'm completely on Rousseau's side, on the classical good or evil human nature. I'm certainly on the side of good human nature.
So how can we learn from children?
By really, adapting their points of view and giving them a full position in our adult life, right? So imagine that kind of in most things that we do, right? Children would be present and we would just ask them. And they would say lots of things. Some of them are weird, etc., right? The interventions of children, to the extent to which they even talk. They would do things rather often, right, than speak, and we should take that very seriously. Yeah? So imagine we stop thinking, for instance, of children as infantile or childish. Imagine we start thinking of them as just full humans. And here's something very important about children that we all forget. They're the most intelligent humans. Right? Who can learn Japanese without having ever learned the language?
That's true.
Who can do that? Right? Yes. Only children. That's the level of intelligence.
What kind of rights should we give them?
Well, I think we should even go as far as campaigning for the children's vote. I think children should be full members of democratic self-determination. And then, of course, you need suitable electoral campaigns for them. Recently, someone has pointed out to me, because I've been talking about this children's vote idea as a thought experiment, and then someone said, but then you also need children's politicians.
Yes.
And that's a brilliant additional thought. I have to say, yes, you're right. So actually, then they should be part of the parliament. And that would change a lot, right?
That's right.
Imagine we had like a democratic governance of this form, planetary, right? And then some place says we need to go to war to some other place. And the children would say, what, no? Are you out of your mind? Right? So you can rest assured that the children part of the parliament would never go to war.
So they will be able to vote and also run for parliament.
Yeah, that would be the more radical. I would start with vote. Gradually, but I have to say, when you open that door, at the end of the day, you have to accept them also in office.
Do you think that's possible, or it's like a moonshot idea?
Look, in Germany, while in power, the Minister of Family Affairs in the early 2000s, at the time, Renate Schmidt, she tried that and she wrote a wonderful book about it.
Wow.
And she was close to like a bill and it was seriously discussed.
I see.
People were not saying you're out of your mind, right? So this was a serious option and it comes up regularly in the German debate here and there. So it is a serious democratic possibility, I think. It's very hard to see reasons against it. The German Supreme Court then, when asked, so some children sued in Germany for electoral rights then, and the court's vote was you can't do it because we never did it. That was the great counter-argument. So they were smart enough not to try to argue against it. They would just say, no, we never did it, so we won't do it.
Do you think children should even join board members of companies?
Yeah, absolutely great idea. We should really go as far as that. We should really include them in everything we do, right? And then respect what they say. Translate this into our language. Like we translate our adult concerns into theirs, we need to translate their concerns into ours, right? But then use that translation in order for the company. I mean, it would certainly be good for, video game companies. That's
yes,
obvious. Right?
That's obvious, yes. Yeah. Tell me about your pizza story of your daughter. Yes.
Yeah, so my daughter, when, she was 4 or 5, asked the lousy jobs question. She asked, why do you as a professor, make more money than someone who cleans the toilet at the train station? She said, that can't be fair. And then the question arose, but how do you get someone to even do that? And she said, okay, here's a solution. Everybody likes pizza. It's like, yeah, kind of true. And then she said, the only way in which you can buy pizza, imagine, would be to have, you have like a digital system or whatever, right? And you clean the toilet at the train station for 1 hour, and that gives you a pizza credit. And similarly for all desirable things that everybody likes. So you have to engage in some social activity, you can get a score. And this is not a surveillance system a la China, right? It's because this is just a fairer solution. It's like, so imagine the family decides, let's go and eat pizza this weekend. And it's like, okay, who cleaned the toilet this weekend? Then just, Uncle Sam has to go. And then Uncle Sam does 1 hour toilet cleaning, green light, pizza, right? And so this is just, I'm not saying that solves it, right? You need to think this through, but there you see it's the idea of a child, and now you translate that, you model it, and you scale it, right? So there has to be a fair and legal version of that lousy job solution, right?
That's a great idea.
And that's better than bring more immigrants in.
Right, that's a great idea. So I think we need to wrap up, and I would like to give us final comments because there's AI, the pandemic. We tend to live in the dark ages or dark times. Could you give us some final comments for our audience? Yes.
Well, I think that we do live indeed in dark times, but we also live in times of hope, because humanity has never been as synchronized, connected, intelligent, and knowledgeable as now. We are also at the peak of human knowledge. So what we need to do is, to drain out the dark parts, right, in the human soul with the best that's available to us, right? In just the idea of a new enlightenment, where a new enlightenment is something we literally do together. The new enlightenment is not a European project. It also originated actually from debates in Asia.
I see. So it's kind of irony that in dark times, moral progresses.
Yes, is possible. Dark times make moral progress more likely, as a matter of fact. But I don't want to pay the price. I would never say, right, that the Holocaust justifies the moral progress, right? The Holocaust was an important bit for moral progress, which happened afterwards in Germany, but nothing justifies the Holocaust, right? So, and while we will learn something from the Ukrainian war in moral terms, it doesn't justify anything, right? So there's no justification for the Dark Ages in any way.
I see.
Yeah. The victims are just victims, and nothing justifies that.
Let me clarify. What can we learn from the Ukraine crisis? What's the moral part of it?
Well, certainly, as an American friend once put it when I came to the US right after the war, he said, well, right now we just learned that there are worse things than Western capitalism. Yeah, but I wouldn't put it like that, right? But I think what we can learn from this, certainly, is that we understand that modernity, which I don't think of as Western, that would already be completely against my universalist impulse, right? Because then you get all these problems. Where's Japan? West, South, East,
Right.
Japan is in the global South, and it's not Western.
Yes.
But it's a super modern. You see, this just doesn't apply to Japan. And this also shows us that these categories are flawed. So instead, I would say what we learned from the Russian case is that modernity is the right thing to do, right? So this is a specifically postmodern empire, a post and anti-modern project that we see in the Kremlin. And so for this reason, the hope is that we realize that modernity is still worth wanting.
That's right. So we need new enlightenment too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, Marcus. I really enjoyed the talk. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on PIVOT.
Thank you.
Yeah.